Okay, so hi, I'm Monsy. I'm one of the co-founders of Onward, our network for the well-being and advancement of relocated dreamers, formerly known as departed dreamers. This is our next series of the video series Dreamers Abroad, which will focus on the lives of dreamers that have left and how their lives have changed since moving to a new country. This is not legal advice nor encouragement for any decision-making process. This is just a series about dreamers and their experiences. Today we have Brizia Ceja Ibarra to talk about their experience moving to Mexico. So, Brizia, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for inviting me. My name is Brizia Ceja Ibarra, and I live in Saltillo, Coahuila, Mexico, which is in the northern part of Mexico, for those that don't know. I've been here for 13 years now, and thank you for having me.
Of course. And you say that you're currently in Mexico, but I know that you used to live in the United States. Could you share a little more of what that experience was like?
Yeah, so I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. I moved there in 2001. So I was 12, 13 years old when I moved there. And from 13 to 24, I lived there with my mom and my siblings and my grandmother. I went to middle school, high school, and then I attended the University of Utah there. And so that's all I knew. That was home for me. That was my life. And then in 2012, I came back to Mexico. But Salt Lake and Utah overall, it still has a very big piece of my heart because a lot of the people that I love still live there.
That's very nice to hear. What were your reasons then for departing the United States?
So my husband actually was deported in 2012, and at that point, I had to decide if I wanted to come to Mexico and be with him, with my husband, or if I was going to stay in Utah. It was a very difficult decision, especially because a couple of weeks before I was set to leave, DACA was announced. So a lot of a lot of people, a lot of friends in my network were trying to encourage me to stay because DACA represented sort of a big opportunity for dreamers, and it was a very tough decision because I also didn't know when I was going to see my mom and my siblings again. But at the end, I decided to continue with my plans and I decided to be with my husband. And so I came back.
That sounds like such a difficult decision, but I think I mean, we will get to hear more about how the decision was for you. But I think it was very brave of you to take that step and to go ahead and take that leap to be together with your husband. I can't imagine having to make that decision. That is very difficult, and I consider it just very, very brave of you to take that step.
Thank you. I mean, now we joke about it, but I tell my husband he's stuck with me forever because like I'm here and now like I have nowhere else to go, so he has to like put up with me forever and ever. And also, so we got married in the US, and then right before when we were in the process of buying our home here in Mexico, we had to, I guess, revalidate. I don't know what the correct word is, but like revalidate our marriage here in Mexico. So now we're married in both countries, so it's tough for him to like leave me now. So we always joke that he's stuck with me forever and ever. I mean,
It's
now
gonna
now
be
we laugh. Back in the day, it was it was not funny.
But your love is that much stronger, right? It's like legitimate in two different countries.
Right? Yeah. But and then like on a more serious note, it was difficult. Like I think at the very beginning after we moved back, it really like all the change of countries also sort of like affected the marriage. So, you know, there were some periods of time that were very difficult, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, we gotta make this work. And now, just like you say, like it's, you know, it's a lot stronger, not just because we're legally married into countries, but because like we have gone through so much together that now it's, you know, that much like more, that much stronger.
I completely understand because, my husband and I also had to leave the United States and went through some difficulties as well. And it does make the love stronger. I think it's funny to look back on it, but boy, does it take a long time to be able to laugh about it together.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
actually very interesting for you because you are from Mexico. So the next question that I have is perhaps it may sound a little silly, but what was the legal process of moving to Mexico?
That is a very interesting question. And I think, you know, back in the day, 30 years ago, I didn't think about that a lot. Because, well, first of all, everything happened so fast. And at that point, I felt like I would just like get on a plane and like come to Mexico. But somebody encouraged me to get a passport, which I did. And I'm very, very glad I did. And in my mind, I'm like, that's it. Like, I'm Mexican. My mom gave me a copy of my birth cert, like a really old copy of my birth certificate. And I was like, I'm set. Like, what else? I don't need anything else. So back then, I just got on the plane. I bought my ticket, got on the plane, showed my passport, and they didn't ask me anything. Um, and then when I arrived here, they they did question me because I was flying from an international flight. So of course, Mexican costumes then were like, why are you carrying like so many suitcases? And I was like, okay, you know, this is my whole life in like two suitcases. This is the first time I'm back in 12 years. So, but they were very nice. So at first, everything, you know, was great. And then when we arrived in the city where we now live, that's when reality started because I realized that first of all, my passport back then, for example, was not valid as an identification in Mexico because I guess the system was different. Um, and so they're like, yeah, no, this is not good. So I show them my consular ID and they're like, Again, this is not valid here in Mexico." And I was like, but the Mexican consulate gave it to me. They're like, yeah, but that's for like when you're in other countries, not in Mexico. So I had no identity, which I thought was very odd because how is this so difficult? So the first thing that we did was to get my INE, which back in the day that was only done in Mexican territory. So because I didn't have any ID, like I only had my very old birth certificate, you had to take witnesses, they call them, with you. So people that can vouch for you and be like, yes, this, you know, she's who she like, she's like a real person, like this is her name. So we had to do that. And the lady that was there helping us, she was super, super nice. And of course, we explained everything. We explained the reason why I didn't have any form of identification. And she was very understanding. But once I got my INE, then everything got a lot easier in a way. Because then I found out that I also, if I wanted a job, I needed an RFC, which is a tax ID number, and then I needed a social security number. And I said, what? We have social security numbers in Mexico? What? What is this? I had to, you know, ask what that was and where do I get this thing. So um, they again, the lady at the INE office and my aunt who was helping us with all, you know, all the documents, they were nice enough to explain that we had to go in person to the IMSS to get the social security number. So we had to do that. It took us like a few hours standing in line. Now you can get it online, which is a lot better, but back then you had to go in person. And then the RFC, again, we had to do it in person, and that took a few hours. But all of that was necessary to get jobs. Everything became easier once we got our IDs, because then we could also get a driver's license. And yeah, so I think back then people were, they didn't meet a lot of like return dreamers. So I always try to explain like, well, like I'm Mexican, but I don't have any documents because I didn't live here. So yeah, but they were very nice, and after we got all those documents, everything became a lot easier. There were still a lot of like bureaucratic like processes that you had to learn, but another thing that was difficult, for example, was buying a car or getting anything on credit because we didn't have any credit history in Mexico. That was actually a lot tougher than getting like identification, because they're like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean you don't have a credit history? I'm like, I've never lived here. I don't know. I was a child when I left. So we had to start from scratch. Um, but then another thing that helped, and maybe I already like went too long on this question, but another thing that helped is that in Mexico, when you get a job, the employer has to pay you through a bank account, and they have to give you the bank account. So it was very easy. Like I didn't have to do anything. My employer at that point gave me my card and my account. So I started sort of like, making like my credit history started building from there. And I didn't have to like go to the bank or anything, which helped a lot, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I never wondered about it, but doesn't your credit history from the United States count for anything?
I don't know if it does now,
Mm.
probably, but back in the day, we, and I only know this because when we moved here, we had some savings. So we thought that maybe we could, like buy a car because we didn't have a car. And um, so we wanted to use our savings for that. And they're like, yeah, no, that you don't have it. And I'm like, but we have like a down pay, like a really good down payment. So I think that actually made it worse because they're like, how come you have this cash, but like you've never had a job and you don't have any credit history? So we ended up buying like a used car from a neighbor. But I think now it might be different. I honestly don't know. But back then, that was not a thing.
That was like too many red flags for them at once. They
Yeah,
were like,
I know.
hmm. But
Seriously.
other than like the legal documental aspect of going back to Mexico and jumping through those hurdles, what was it like for you to be like, okay, like I'm back in Mexico?
Um, so I That's a very like loaded question. So I was very scared. I think I was mostly concerned about safety and being able to find a job. I knew, of course, that even if I didn't get a job, like I was gonna find a way to survive. Like I think I've always had that mindset, especially being raised by like single women. Like I knew, I could make it. But I was of course that was a concern, like finding a job and also safety, because you would hear all of these horrible things happening in Mexico in the news. So we moved. First, we went to Sinaloa, which is where I'm originally from. And we were there for about a week because, so my husband was already in Mexico because he had been deported like a few months before. We met there in Sinaloa because we never had a honeymoon when we got married. So we're like, okay, we're gonna go to the beach and that's gonna be our honeymoon. Like, we're gonna make something good out of this shitty situation. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I can swear, but of this crappy situation. So, uh, we went to the beach and I went back to my hometown, which is like a really small town, and I met with my friends from elementary school. And it was really, really great. And then, so of course I was like, oh, Mexico, I love it. Like, like I feel so free and like, nobody can tell me anything because I'm Mexican and blah, blah, blah. And then we flew to Saltillo. Well, we flew to Monterrey and then to Saltillo. And and then as I started going to job interviews, and then I got a job, and then things started to hit me, like the reality of the difference in culture. So I didn't feel like unsafe, like, safety was not concerned at that point. My husband and I, we both were working, but I started realizing that the culture was so different. And I remember one of my colleagues in my very first job, because I was in charge of human resources for like a small company here in the city, and my one of my colleagues was like, "Hey, you're not in Utah anymore. Like people here are going to take advantage if you're too nice. Like you have to like be tougher." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like people are like, I believe people are so nice. Like by nature, we're all good people." And they're like, "No, you cannot think that way here." And that sort of like bothered me a little bit because I was like, no, like that's not like this is not the way that things were where I grew up in Salt Lake. And I would be, maybe driving and people would like change lanes without signaling. I'm like, that's not right. Like that's not how things are done. So I would like be comparing everything to Utah or to the US. I wouldn't say it out loud, but I would think it. And that made it so difficult because it took me a long time to accept that I was here and to stop comparing. And I think that set me back, because it took me a long time. Like, thank goodness for therapy. But otherwise, yeah, and then of course things change with time. And also another thing, it's in the city where I live, it's still very much it's a conservative place, and religion is still a huge part. Whereas in Salt Lake is very liberal. Even though it's in Utah, it's a very liberal city. But so there was like this huge like clash of cultures. That, of course, has changed, but I feel that it was so unexpected because, of course, you think I'm Mexican. Like, what do you mean I'm not going to be used to living in Mexico? But it really is different for me, at least. It was different for me being Mexican in the US than being Mexican in Mexico. And I actually think, in my experience, it was a lot harder to be Mexican in Mexico. So, yeah.
I can relate that it is difficult in Mexico, but I do think for me, being Mexican in the US was definitely harder. But to be fair though, I haven't lived in Mexico and like had to figure out the system on my own. Like I would probably have cried a lot if I had had to at some point do that.
There were
But
a lot
it
of
does
tears.
sound, yeah,
Yes.
that's how you grow, Waters, plants need water, so that's how you
Yes.
grow and make sure that you continue blooming. Even though it was a bit of a tough start, what opportunities have opened up to you since moving to Mexico?
So here where I live, there are a lot of companies from other countries. So we have a lot of manufacturing plants and assembly plants. And the fact that I'm bilingual and the fact, not only bilingual, but bicultural has helped me a lot. And also the fact that my degrees are from the US, it has helped me a lot, even though I mean, I don't know how I feel about it, but at least in the private industry here where I live, the fact that you have a degree from a, US university, it's a big deal. And so it helped me a lot with finding a job when I moved here. Definitely. I was able to get a job in one of the manufacturing plants that we have here. I learned a lot and I loved it, but it was also a very tough job. And then I left that job 6 years ago to work like on my own, to start building my own business. So now I work with companies and clients from different countries, and I think I would not be able to do that if I lived in the US. Not because it's not possible, of course it is possible, but when I was in the US, I was so focused on surviving, and I loved the job that I had. The last job that I had in the US, it was everything to me because I worked with students that were high school students that were looking to get into college, and most of them were either like undocumented or refugees. So I felt, very good about the job that I was doing there, but also because of my status, I didn't, I wasn't getting paid like enough to have a good life. So my husband and I were struggling a lot, even though we were there. But I didn't want to look for other jobs because I loved the job that I was doing and I loved the people. So I was so focused on surviving and like doing community work and activism that that was my life, And here it's like, okay, I have this freedom. I can focus. Like I remember when I was looking for a job the first time, and it just sort of dawned on me, like, shoot, like I can literally apply to any company. Like even if I'm not qualified, I know they're not gonna reject me because I don't have a social security number, because now I do have a social security number. And I just felt so good. I mean, maybe it's like a stupid thought, but it's like I can literally apply anywhere in this country, and I'm not gonna be rejected because of that. So then once I moved here, I could focus on like actually growing professionally and economically as well. And I don't know if that would have been possible if I stayed over there. So yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely that freedom of mobility and the freedom of like the security of knowing you're not going to be questioned or going to be made to jump through these hoops that like other people aren't made to jump through.
Yeah.
So I definitely get that to be able to just like you can choose what job you have, and it's not like you have to stay at a specific job because it's the only place available is such a different feeling for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I know that we touched a bit on some of the difficulties, but were there any other specific difficulties that you experienced from being someone who originally lived in the United States and then moved back to Mexico?
Um, yes. So we talked about, the cultural shock that I did not expect. But also, and this happens still nowadays. I mean, this just happened to me in January, so a couple months ago, where I'm some people think think that I'm still too American for Mexico, which blows my mind because, okay, first of all, I'm obviously not. Like I've been here longer than I ever lived in the US. So it bothers me a little bit that those comments come up. But so I mean, it's not really a difficulty, but I don't appreciate when people make those comments. Also, um, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Um, I've always been very open about my situation. Like even when I was in the US, I was always very open that I was undocumented. I never like hid my name or like my face. I don't know. I don't know why. I never did. And for me now, it's a sort of like pride, if you will, to because being undocumented is shaped who I am and it shaped the values that I have and it shaped how I see the world and how I interact with people. And I think in this happens in all countries. It's not just in the US, but here in Mexico, there is um, a very large, like, there's a lot of people that are like classist. Well, that's not the word, is it?
So there's a lot of people that tend to, I guess, discriminate against people that so to be classes, or is it discriminatory because of like regions of Mexico?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So for example, I live in the northern part of Mexico. We are fairly close to the border, and here there's a large sentiment of classism because people here in the north are usually, um, they usually have lighter skin. And for example, when since this region is growing a lot because of all of the manufacturing and the industry, there's a lot of people from central Mexico and southern Mexico that are coming over to work here, and they're not treated the best. And there's also, unfortunately, a large anti-immigrant sentiment because we are closer to the border. There are a lot of immigrants from Central and South America and like Haiti that come through here to get on the train to try to get to the U.S. border. And unfortunately, a lot of people, they're not the nicest about that. So when I hear those comments, and because of the type of work that I do and the organizations that I belong to, unfortunately, I get to hear these comments a lot. And it bothers me so much because I was an undocumented immigrant too. Um, so I feel that that made me be more open about where I come from and my story, right? Because when people see me, and I've noticed this, like when they introduce me, they're like, oh, like Brizia went to school in the US and Brizia like speaks English. And I was like, yeah, but like I was also an undocumented immigrant and it sucked. And like, we had to go because we didn't have any food to eat. And I think that makes them uncomfortable when I talk about this. And I feel so good when that happens. But also, there is like that has been very, very difficult, for me because these are people that I talk to and that I belong to some of the same organizations, and we cross paths all the time. And I'm constantly looking at ways of like, okay, how do I use like what I know to create some type of change? Um, and of course, it's very different because we also have a large immigrant community from the US and Canada and Europe here in Mexico. And it's not the same treatment, right? That when we have, immigrants from Haiti that are being separated and like nobody talks about that. That happens in the southern border in Mexico. Families get separated and nobody talks about it. Like we think that this only happens in the US, but it doesn't. And so this, I think that has been a big challenge for me because I sort of like refuse to adjust or I refuse to be part of it, right? But it's also like, but I live here and this is my community now, and like I need to be part of it. So it's like I'm back in the US. It's like I consider myself very much American because this is where I grew up, but also like I'm an activist and like we need to talk about the difficult conversations. And now it's happening here too. So that has been a challenge. And I don't know if that answered the question, Monsi. Maybe I went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's definitely a difficulty that I've also experienced, like in Germany, that um I I hate for it to sound like this, right? But people are like, "Oh, like you're American," when they hear my accent. So they're like, "Oh, you probably went to American school," all those different things. So they think I'm of a certain socioeconomic status, but I am
Yeah,
not. And so they feel
exactly.
so certain people feel very um like they're in an area where like because I must be of a certain socioeconomic status, I must look down on certain people. And I absolutely refuse to be complicit in that, in talking badly about immigrants or refugees or undocumented people. Like it's definitely something that
Yeah,
happens, and I'm the first one to be like, no, I don't believe in that. I'm sorry. I used to be
yeah.
undocumented. So it's it's hard to not hurt people's feelings, to not make them feel called out. But at the same time, I'd much rather do that than to allow them to believe that I agree with them on something like that.
Yeah, and that's something interesting what you're saying, like I don't think if like the fact that I'm a citizen here and I'm Mexican, I can do it, like I can call you out because now it's like I'm also a business owner. Like I'm a Mexican citizen. Like, what are you gonna do to me? Like, I'm not afraid of what you can do to me. Like, we are at the same level. So if I can, I will make you uncomfortable when we're talking about this. And I don't know that I would have done that when I was in the US undocumented because I was afraid, of course. I was always very open, but I was also afraid because it wasn't just me, right? I had uh, my brother, my sister, my mom. And so that also, we go back to that sense of freedom and that sense of like reclaiming like my space and like who I am. So it's definitely been an interesting journey professionally, but also personally for me. And also, as I become more of an adult. I mean, I was an adult when I moved back, but now I am an older adult and then I have kids now, so things change. So it's been an interesting journey.
I mean, because I do the same thing. I believe this is the right choice. However, I just want to let you know that I think that a really important part of having greater sets of privileges is to use those privileges for good to like bolster other people. So personally, and this may be biased, I think you're doing the right thing, even if at first it can be uncomfortable. Like I think we all have to go through that where this like learned classism or like regionalism or even just dehumanization that we have for certain groups of people. If we just think about it, we're like, oh my goodness, no, that was a terrible thing to say. Why do I believe it? And it
Yeah.
helps to reshape the way people think. So I think you're doing the Lord's work. And even though it's uncomfortable, like people have to learn how to live with that uncomfortableness around me. And it's I think you're doing great.
Yeah. Thank
And
you. Thank
before
you. That means a lot.
and then before we close off, I actually wanted to ask you one last question. It is, what would you recommend to people who are in a similar situation to yours? They are in a situation where they have to leave the United States and they're thinking about going back to Mexico.
Yes, a couple of things come to mind. I think, well, the first one, and I think the most like practical and obvious one, if possible, of course, save as much money as possible so you can bring it with you. That's going to be very, very useful. I think that's a given. That one actually doesn't matter what country you go to, just, try to have some money saved. But the other thing that I wish I hadn't done when I first moved here is um, do not compare where you where you're moving to the US. I think it's important to know that each country doesn't matter, like whether it's, Mexico, Canada, Spain, Germany, whatever country in the world it is, every country has its own systems, rules, cultures, like the way people live, the things people do, it's going to be different. And if we are comparing it all the time, we are going to be very disappointed. So definitely, I think changing that mindset and being open to, embracing where you're going to live. It's like I work in HR, so it's like when you get a new job, even though you're really good at your craft, like you still have to learn the culture of the company, how things are done. Um, and so it's the same thing. Like you come to a new country because if you maybe left Mexico when you were little, this is going to be a new country, even though you were born here. So getting used to the culture and the way things work, it's very, very important. So keeping an open mind. And another thing that I was talking to my mom about this a few days ago, but it's like, the world has changed so much. And for those of you who are thinking of like coming back to Mexico, it's not the same country that our parents left 20, 30 years ago. The world is not the same as it was 20 or 30 years ago. Things have changed so much. So, understanding that you're coming back to a different country and also understanding that our context, or let me talk just in the first person, my context, for example, was very different than my mom's context. When she decided to go to the US, she literally had no money to buy us food. She didn't go to school. She lived in a very small town in Sinaloa, and life was difficult for a single mom. I mean, things are difficult now for a single mom. So imagine, 30 years ago, it was a lot more challenging. But that is so different from my context because thanks to her, and I have an education, I was able to go to school. I became bilingual. I became bicultural, which is different from being bilingual. You can be bilingual and not be bicultural. And all of that has opened a lot of doors for me here. And I was telling her that, we have this idea of the American dream and searching for the American dream and following the American dream. And maybe back in the day, maybe, 30 years ago, that could be accomplished in the US. But I think the American dream meant giving their kids the ability to have a good education, have a good life, have a good job, live in peace. And it just happened to be in the US back then. Nowadays, maybe we can live that. For me, I can live that same dream that she had, but on this side of the border. And that's, my Mexican dream, if you want to call it, right? But this is like I'm living the life that she wanted for me. So at the end of the day, it's really, yeah, maybe it didn't happen in the US. And this is difficult to see when everything is the US, right? And when you've been taught since you're little that that's it, like the US is the place to be. When in reality, there's so many more opportunities out there. But it can be scary. It can be scary, but just, I think we have to trust in our own capacities and our own knowledge to go out there and you live a more like free life and be able to experience other things. So yeah, I guess my advice is save money and just think about the American dream. Like what does that mean for your family and for you?
That was so beautiful. And I completely agree with just everything you said, Brizia. It has been so wonderful to get to speak to you, to hear about the journey that you have made. And just to be able to know you is just inspiring because you're dare I say a Latina chingona. And I hope that doesn't get us censored on YouTube, but but it's just so wonderful to know people who have gone through difficulties and they were like, I'm going to do these things even though it's scary and I'm going to go for it even though it's really hard. And just not giving up and choosing to bloom wherever you're potted is an incredible
Yeah.
choice to make.
Yeah, exactly. No, I totally agree with that. I said it can be a very tough decision. It's difficult, especially if you're living in, you still have family in the US and you don't know when you're going to see them again. I know for me that has been, very, very tough. But at the same time, it's like I need to live my own life, right? And I need to make my own, sort of like my own dream. And this is where I chose to do it. And, so far so good. Still here. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brizia. And that concludes our Dreamer Abroad interview with Brizia Ceja Ibarra in Mexico. Thank you all so much for being here, and we will see you at the next interview.